Hello and welcome back to the 2023-2024 school year. In addition to the annual paperwork you complete each August, we are also required to review and complete training on child abuse recognition and reporting and professional relationships with students. I will be reviewing child abuse recognition and reporting refresher training, which continues along our series of trainings you have each year. For those of you that may be new to the audience this year, this portion of your job is very important. You will also have additional training provided by your supervisor. At the end of this training, you will also be given a quiz. If you see a light bulb on the slide during the presentation, that is a good indicator that the information on that slide might be included in the quiz. So why do we do this training? We know that it's required as mandated reporters to complete 3 hours of child abuse training every 5 years, but did you know that child abuse is probably more common than you know? In 2021, in Pennsylvania alone, there were 38,013 reports of suspected child abuse. This is an increase of almost 5,000 reports from 2020. This increase was anticipated largely due to the decline of reports observed in 2020. That decline in 2020 was attributed to the COVID-19 pandemic and the reduced contact between children and mandated reporters during that time. Mandated reporters are anyone that works with children in their work setting, so teachers, school bus drivers, school aides. In 2020, when children stopped having contact with those mandated reporters, there were less adults in contact with the children who really needed their help. The percentage of reports of suspected abuse that were substantiated decreased from 14% in 2020 to 13.2% in 2021. Substantiated means that when a report was made and child abuse was proven. An unfounded report means that the report was made, but there was no evidence of child abuse. You can also see on our graph on the right-hand side, it displays the victims' ages from this 2021 report. The ages that are covered by the bus are ages of children you may see riding on your daily route. Over 3,500 of the victims in 2021 were school-aged children that potentially could be riding on your bus. This is why this training is so crucial, and it's unfortunately more prevalent than we may think. This slide represents the number of cases per county in Pennsylvania. In blue, you have the number of suspected reports. Again, some suspected abuse may be reported, but then determined to be unfounded or not enough evidence to constitute child abuse. In green, you have the number of reports that were actually substantiated or proven child abuse. In Montgomery County, there were 1,291 suspected reports and 137 substantiated reports, which is an increase of 48 substantiated reports from last year. In Chester County, there were 990 suspected reports and 116 were substantiated. Oftentimes, after an investigation, the suspected abuse is determined to be unfounded, but we'll review in a little bit why it's still so important to make the report regardless. Here we have a chart of the total substantiated reports in Pennsylvania. Remember, substantiated means the abuse was reported, investigated, and deemed to be child abuse. We're going to review the types of abuse as a refresher. Unfortunately, the highest percent of substantiated reports is sexual abuse at almost 40%. The next highest category is physical abuse, which would be punching, kicking, burns. At 13.2%, we have the reasonable likelihood of bodily injury. The reasonable likelihood means that they might not have been hurt, but it is very likely that they would have been hurt. Like you threw a knife at a child or a hammer at a child and they ducked. They did not get hurt, but that act was deemed to be child abuse. Next is serious physical neglect. And serious physical neglect can look like an injury that has not been addressed at the doctor or failure to provide adequate essentials of life like food, shelter, or clothing. And only 4% is per se acts, which are certain acts that are considered child abuse regardless of if an injury occurs. For example, physical violence that endangers the child, restraining or confining the child, shaking a child, striking a child, interfering with the breathing of a child. Again, these things may not have ended up injuring them, but it is an act that is considered child abuse regardless. likelihood of sexual abuse or exploitation. This could be like leaving a child in the care of a known sex offender. Serious mental injury is often a hard category to identify, but sometimes it can present in a child as depression, mental or emotional developmental delays, self-injury, suicide attempts, antisocial behavior, including cruelty to other children or animals, or alcohol or drug abuse. The next type of child abuse is severe forms of trafficking. We will go into this a little bit later, but I do want to note that trafficking cases have almost doubled since the 2020 report was put out. And the last category is Munchausen syndrome by proxy or medical abuse. This is relatively rare form of child abuse, but it involves the exaggeration or fabrication of an illness or symptoms by a primary caregiver. School bus drivers and aides see students almost every day as they transport them between home and school. They're often keenly aware of changes in students' behaviors, moods, physical appearance, and attendance. School bus drivers are also uniquely positioned to see if new or different people are waiting to pick up the student from the bus, and they may even observe signs of controlling or manipulative behavior. This is why we say every year that it's so important to get to know the students on your bus, get to know who's picking and dropping them off on a usual daily basis, so that you know their baseline. And if their behavior starts to move away from that baseline, you can kind of be in tune to what's happening and maybe make some notes and document what's happening. This graph now shows the relationship of the perpetrator, or the person who's carrying out the abuse, to the victim. The bus on each graph indicates that they are all possibly individuals who are taking the students on and off the bus each day. So unfortunately, the highest reported perpetrator is their mother or father. They also could be a relative, an aunt or an uncle, a sibling, a parent's spouse, a babysitter. So these are all people that you may see at the bus stop putting on and off the children. Human trafficking, as we saw on the types of abuse chart, is becoming more prevalent. Approximately 30% of trafficking victims are minors across Pennsylvania. 2 out of the 3 victims are girls, and the average age of a trafficked minor is between 11 to 14. In 2021 in Pennsylvania, the PA State Police received 1,080 tip calls, 192 human trafficking cases, and almost 25% of them were unfortunately minors. First and foremost, follow the reporting protocols set out by your school district and your state for reporting child abuse. If there's specific protocols for human trafficking, you would follow them, and if they do not exist, you would just follow the protocols on reporting child abuse and or sexual assault. While suspected trafficking in school should always be reported following the proper school protocols, there are national hotlines that also would be able to connect the schools to local resources for an identified victim. And we have that listed here at the top, the National Human Trafficking Hotline. They're also available should you notice a potential victim outside of the school environment in your non-work life. Calls to the hotline are confidential, and you can request to remain anonymous. Here are some of the red flags you can look for in students to identify human trafficking. Students who have frequent absences or absent for days at a time. A new person dropping them off or picking them up, usually an older person than the child. Signs of bruises, physical trauma, inappropriate dress for the weather, markings or tattoos, which could be a trafficker's branding. Students who suddenly have the latest gadgets, clothes, nails. Again, this is not a student that just got a new cell phone. That happens a lot. But it's someone if they're always getting the newest things and they're always kind of decked out in all of these new clothes and nails. It's just something to pay attention to. They could be given to that student from their trafficker as part of the grooming process to gain their trust and then unfortunately take advantage of that trust. Pay attention to any mention that a student has an older boyfriend, a pimp, sugar daddy, anything like that relationship that would be inappropriate. If they've talked about making a quota, things like those are going to be your trigger words, and you really want to report them. Questions you might ask is, do you know the person who is picking you up? If it's someone different, just making sure that they know that person. Or if something's really, happening, you can ask, is everything okay at home? And are you okay to get off the bus with this person? Something that has been going around social media that you may have seen is the signal for help. The signal for help, or the violence at home signal sign, is a single-handed gesture that can be used over by an individual to alert others that they need help and they're in a bad situation.
Or if you see this symbol, you need to get help immediately. Open hand, thumb across your palm, and close your four fingers into a fist.
Your hand is up like this, then you tuck your thumb in and all four fingers over that thumb and back and forth. A motorist notified our 911 dispatch center that he had observed a young lady in a passenger car, that she appeared to be in distress, and that she was giving the TikTok signal to him that she was in distress and had a fear for her life. We positioned ourselves along the interstate at exit 41, about 9 miles from that location. And our detectives even said that they looked in and the female was still giving that signal, which we didn't even know what it meant. We do now. And we conducted a traffic stop by boxing the vehicle in. I got the 16-year-old missing person female out of the vehicle safely and arrested the driver, a 61-year-old male from the same town that this young lady was from. That application on TikTok, that hand gesture was everything. Had that not been transmitted by the young lady, had there not been someone out there that knew how to interpret what she was doing, then who knows, we may not have had a good resolution on this. And maybe this will be a good thing, because this story has went national, and we think that motorists and law enforcement agencies nationwide should be aware of this and know what this signal means. And I think it can be quite useful in the future.
If someone has shown you the signal for help sign, what should you do? If it's an emergency, call 911, obviously. If you're able to help the victim and ask them, are you in danger? Do you need help? But oftentimes, if you see this would be a great signal that you should tell your compliance officer that you may think that something is happening. Unfortunately, many cases go unreported. This may be because there's confusion or uncertainty about how to report. And again, that's why we do this training every year. And we do this training for new employees so that you know how to report. And we'll go into that in a little bit. They may be ignorant to the warning signs. And that's, again, why we go over all of these red flags. And hopefully you can carry this training throughout the year so that if you see those things, you'll know that it needs to be reported. Fear of inadequate response. They don't want to become involved, but this is your job. You are required as a mandated reporter to get involved if you see something. Fearful of repercussions or concerned that reporting may violate professional obligations. But this training is to tell you that it is your obligation to report something if you see something. And if a report is made and it has become unfounded, you won't get in trouble for making that report if it was done in good faith. Again, it's not your responsibility to investigate. It's just your responsibility to be involved and contact the appropriate professionals when you have heightened concerns. You don't need to have evidence or actual knowledge of the abuse to make the report. All you need is reasonable suspicion. The more specific and concrete information you can provide, the better, but we don't recommend taking pictures or anything like that. Jotting down notes, and then when you get back to the depot, making an official report is plenty of documentation. There are repercussions for mandated reporters if they know or should have known that the abuse was happening and they do not report it. So the first violation would be a second-degree misdemeanor. If the suspected abuse continues or that person has more contact with the children or there are subsequent failures to report, you could be charged with a third-degree felony, which carries a penalty of up to 7 years in prison and a fine of up to $15,000. Pennsylvania really wanted to put teeth to the child abuse laws in our state to make sure that if there is abuse happening and you know it, you need to report it. And again, if you make the report and it is unfounded and you made the report in good faith, you will not be held liable. You won't get in trouble. So really, they really just want you to report if you think something's happening. If you have reasonable suspicion, it's always better to make the report and just to make sure that child is getting help. So quiz time. Who is a mandated reporter? You. Mandated reporters are adults who work or volunteer with children and youth and are required to report suspected child abuse if they have reasonable cause to suspect that a child is being abused. The reporting process. When do you report? Reporting child abuse is not only the right thing to do, but it also may make the difference in a child's life. The earlier that prevention and interventions can be provided, the greater likelihood that damage to the child can be averted or at the very least minimized. Efforts to prevent child maltreatment allow children to grow up healthier. Prevention also reduces the burden on systems and services such as education, law enforcement, corrections, and mental health. The money saved can certainly be used in better ways to enhance the lives of America's children. And honestly, our number one priority is the children's safety. So that's really the number one reason why we should report. If it's an emergency, you see a child is being abused right in front of you, you call 911. If it's urgent, you think something's happening, but you don't need to make that 911 call, you can call your dispatcher and they can get you help. If it's critical, you've seen a couple of red flags, you don't have a good gut feeling about it, you're going to come back to your depot, find your compliance officer, and they will help you make the report to Childline. So how do you report? First, like I said, you're going to try to find your compliance officer. And after this training, if you don't know who your compliance officer is, ask your supervisor, who usually is your compliance officer, but they can direct you on who you would report it to if something should happen. Reports should be made immediately. The quicker we can get the report in, the quicker we can get an investigation started, and the quicker we can get that child help. You can make reports by phone or online. If you do make a phone report, we do suggest that you also do it online and vice versa. So honestly, belt and suspenders, you want to make sure that that report is being captured by Childline and to make sure that they get investigated right away. Oral reports are made to Childline at 800-932-0313, and it is available 24/7. Online reports are made at that website that's listed below, but if you Google Pennsylvania Child Abuse Report, it comes up right away, and it's a pretty easy online form. Both of these ways, you never need to do it alone. Your compliance officer will sit and help you explain what happened, explain what you saw, make sure that you fill out the form correctly. And if they need help, they can always call our firm, R.C. Kelly Law Associates, and we will help them walk through the process. Once a report to Childline is made, we recommend a courtesy call to children and youth in your county. All kind of work together to start the investigation process. We also do recommend that you notify your school district, or your compliance officer can notify your school district, because oftentimes the investigation will take place at the school, not the child's home. So we want to make sure that we're being partners with our school district and keeping them in the loop. And they also might have some additional information or red flags that they've been seeing. So we just want to communicate that with them. There are protections for mandated reporters, like I've said. You have immunity from civil or criminal liability if you make the report, you cooperate with the investigation, and you're doing it in good faith. They also might ask you to testify or provide additional information as needed. We also want to review tips for maintaining professional relationships with students. We talk about this every year because we know you guys are on the buses, you are awesome drivers and aides, and we want to make sure that nothing you do is construed in the wrong way and really just setting yourself up for a successful year. We want to avoid inappropriate contact physically and socially with students. So physically, offer the fist bump, the air five, make sure that you're having that acceptable distance. We're not giving hugs or anything like that. And create those rules on day one. Some of the littles, may want to give you hugs, but I love air high fives, or I love fist bumps. Let's do that. Socially, obviously, we always recommend no social media, no texting, no phone number. Don't share things. You have plenty of people you can be friends with at your company or outside of work. We really don't need to be having these kinds of relationships with the students on our bus. We also want to make sure that we're having appropriate relationships with the students. Be kind but firm. Again, set those rules on day one so they know what to expect from you and what to do when they're on the bus. Make sure that the conversations you're having with your aides or other bus drivers when you're around children, we call it grandmom approved, so nothing you'd want to say in front of your grandmom, but obviously making sure that you're being appropriate with the things that you're saying, because kids hear everything. And now they record everything and they have videos of everything. So honestly, just keep it grandmom approved when you're working. And treat the children how you would want your child to be treated by others. In our last portion, we did want to talk about some good drivers and bad drivers, because a lot of these things we talk about, we always, hear drivers say that I would never do that. Well, that's crazy, but it's out there, it's happening, and this is why we do this training, to make sure that you guys are on the right side and you're going to have a great school year. So you can see these are all from 2023. A school bus driver was arrested for distributing marijuana vape pens to students. He was bringing them to this 13-year-old. The 13-year-old was then distributing them at school, and obviously you cannot do that. So the driver was charged with aiding and abetting a minor. He hasn't gone to trial yet, but he could face up to 22 years in prison. The other one that had just happened in the spring of 2023 was a video showing a bus driver driving while he was intoxicated. You can look this up online. The video shows him saying, "I'm too drunk to read this," and then he keeps driving, and he's driving the students. So the aide within the school district reported him. They gave him a breathalyzer. He was 0.118, and in West Virginia, this is where this happened, the legal limit is 0.08. So obviously very intoxicated. And I highlighted this section here because it's very important to note. A second man was terminated from the school system, and I think that he has charges pending because the video showed that he allegedly knew the individual was driving the bus under the influence, and he failed to report it. So this really goes in line with our fitness for duty that we talk about. Make sure that you are able and ready to drive and be safe, but also that those around you are doing the right thing. If you see someone that is obviously not able to drive or not fit to drive, you want to make that report to your supervisor and really make sure that those students who are getting on your bus are safe. And we do want to share a wonderful couple of drivers. This driver here, and I've seen a couple of these actually, the door opens and the car drives back, and she pulls his shirt back to save him from getting off the bus and getting hit by a car. And we talk about this all the time, obviously you can't pull or push children, but if you are doing it in an act to save them, obviously we'd want her to save that child and save him from danger. So this was a great school bus driver who acted very quickly. And the last story I want to share was a heroic bus driver who was credited with saving students from a school bus fire. The driver acted quick using their evacuation training that they've done, and they got everyone off safely. There was no injuries, and the students were on a different bus and sent home shortly after. So this bus driver really used her training of evacuation drills, really got those students off the bus and made sure everybody was safe. Thank you to everybody for always putting your students' safety first and digesting this information that we review each year to make sure that you're prepared for the school year. So when should you report? If you should have reasonable belief, you should do it immediately. And if you see something, you should say something.